Hey everybody, it's Mike Cadieux from Procurement Foundry. We're just getting started. We got some people coming into the room already. We're also going to have some folks live on LinkedIn today. Yet another great piece of content from Procurement Foundry today. Super excited to have some folks from PricewaterhouseCoopers with us today, talking about digital transformation and what happens when you're changing in digital transformation and why you need to have IT involved at the very beginning. So I'm just going to verify that we are online with our LinkedIn, and then we'll get going. As all of you know, we tend to restream on LinkedIn as well. So I'm just going to double check that, make sure that we have an audience on LinkedIn as well as a local audience here. And then I'll do a little bit of housekeeping, and then we'll get rocking and rolling with this. So just be just be a couple second patient with me, Katelyn and Ashish, and we'll get going. Just want to verify that we're
sure, Mike.
Yeah, we're up and streaming. That's fantastic. All right, I just got to click into this so that I can see this. All right, there we go. This is what happens when you're a one-man studio. All right, I'm going to kill the audio on that. All right, so if you can see me on LinkedIn, hello to everybody on LinkedIn. Really excited to have you with us. We had great audience participation yesterday. We'll probably have even better audience participation today. Amazing topic today, right at the core of what I do, because I'm ex-IT. As a lot of you know, I used to be a vice president of IT, and now I've been in procurement for the last 10 years. So I'm super excited to talk about the impact of change in digital transformation and what happens when you leave, what you leave on the table by not engaging IT. So as I said earlier, we've got our subject matter experts from PricewaterhouseCoopers with Katelyn, Wagner, and Ashish Punjabi, and we're going to talk for about 45 minutes to an hour on this topic. We had a pre-run through earlier this week that was amazing. I think you're going to get tons of value out of this. There's going to be lots of nuggets dropped here, so please stick with us. As far as the folks that are inside of the Zoom room, please use chat to tell us where you are and where you're from. Introduce yourself on the chat. If you have a question, please use the Q&A inside of the chat for us so that I can monitor the chat and I can monitor the Q&A and I can work them in. The way we work, you all know this, it's very interactive. If you've got a question associated with a topic that we're discussing at that particular time, we'll integrate that all in. So that said, all the housekeeping done, you know where the exits are and you know how to get out of, I have never done that before, but glad that giving some hand signals here. So so let me do this. Welcome, Katelyn and Ashish. Great to have you with us today. Thank you so much for taking the time out to talk about this topic. I think, as always, I like to allow our guests to introduce themselves. So why don't we start ladies first. Katelyn, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, what your responsibilities are, maybe a little bit about your background so we all understand your expertise.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So hi, everybody. I am a director within our PwC SAP TMT practice, which stands for Technology, Media, Telecoms. But I have experience across multiple different industries, but that is my home within PwC. I focus on project management and change management for large business transformations enabled by SAP. So I'm responsible for delivering projects on time, on budget, but also with adoption and buy-in from my stakeholders. So from a personal perspective, I'm dialing in here from Boston, Massachusetts. I live here with my husband and my new favorite coworker, Bowman. He is a 10-month-old, 100-pound Bernese Mountain Dog. And hopefully he will be quiet this whole session. Let's see. I gave him a bone, so let's see. Fingers crossed.
That's ambitious, having a 100-pound dog in downtown Boston. Congratulations.
I know. He's like the mayor of the South End, so it's a lot of fun. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, but I'm excited to be here and connecting with you all. So.
Thank you so much, and I hope that the weather starts to break for you in Boston. I'm just south of you about an hour, so it looks like the weather's starting to break. Yes. And hopefully Boston is a great summer. So as long as the Red Sox are winning, we're all happy, right? That's all that really matters in life. So Ashish, a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, where you are, what you focus on, please.
Yeah. So my name is Ashish Punjabi, and I work as a partner in the supply chain practice within PwC. Have been doing supply chain for almost 20 plus years. and have done almost all aspects of it, from plan, make, source, deliver, return. Have touched upon most of those, and lately have been focused more on the procurement side of the world, all the way from upstream, downstream, and the technology being the backbone of most of the work I'm doing. I have a very good understanding of how to deliver transformation because I have done it before with the clients that we work with. So again, today's session is going to be, very candid, very honest. You have questions, we'll tell you what works, what doesn't from a transformation standpoint. And as you can imagine, last few years have been very focused on technology innovations and emerging technologies out there that are digitizing the way we look at information and execute processes. So we'll cover that as well as a part of today's discussion. Coming to my, personal self, I live in Dallas, Texas. I've been here for almost 15 years. Before that was in Buffalo, New York, where, again, very close to the cold front that you guys are talking about, but I haven't seen that in a long time till this February. In February in Dallas, we had, minus 30 degrees, and people here we did not know how to survive, but somehow managed to. That's for me. I am here with my two kids, my wife and two dogs. Again, last 13 months have been cooped up in the house, have not traveled anywhere. Looking forward to kind of getting back on the plane and meeting people outside of the home.
Yeah, I haven't had a run in at Burrito Beach in Chicago O'Hare in about 3 years now, and I need to get one of those 17-pound burritos from Burrito Beach. In a hurry. I miss O'Hare for that one and only reason. The rest of O'Hare can go away, but Burrito Beach needs to stay. So let's dig in. You have, and I have to admit, you have, when we started this conversation and you told me what topic you wanted to talk about, I was like, wow, we are not sugarcoating it. We're jumping right in here. This is the topic of topics, right? Which is how to make sure that you don't leave anything on the table by not having IT involved, and how to make sure that you're getting everything that you can get out of audio digital transformation by keeping IT involved, which I think in procurement, and we talked about this earlier this week, I think procurement is constantly fighting a battle on trying to be involved in IT projects, but then sometimes in our own procurement projects, we tend to leave IT out. So definitely something that I think is essential. Why don't we start by defining what digital transformation is? I'm really interested in your thoughts on that. There's a lot of buzzwords out there. I think there's a lot of people that are talking about this but don't necessarily know what it is. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. What is digital? What is your definition of digital transformation initiative?
Yeah, I can go first, and Katelyn, maybe you can chime in there. So I think, honestly, there is no one right definition for digital transformation. There is definitions, and there are definitions you live by, right? So for me, if I have to define it, I want to rather break it into two components: the transformation aspect of it and the digitization of the transformation. So what is really transformation? I mean, it's not a word that's been coined only recently. It's been there forever. And in our minds, transformation is when you're questioning status quo. You're trying to go beyond where your current constraints are. You're trying to go closer to the customer, closer to your partners you're dealing with. You're trying to increase your revenue while managing your costs. Anytime you're questioning status quo, you're thinking about some foundational changes in which you're running your business, right? And again, as I said, there are multiple there is a spectrum of where you want to be in the transformation. There are there are novices in the challenging, in the world of challengers, and then there are people who actually do it really well. Now, how do you enable this transformation? Is using the digital technologies, for example. We've talked about data, right? Data, information is the king. Real-time information helps you drive decisions. When you combine, and the way you get all this information real time so that you can make decisions is purely based on the technology you have enabled your processes on. So when you combine the two, where you have data, information, and insights into what's going to happen, and you mix it with the transformation of the business processes, that's where you kind of get a real good picture of where your digital transformation journey will take you as and when it kind of unfolds. That's how I look at it, at a digital transformation from a definition standpoint.
Any thoughts on that, Katelyn? Anything to add on
No,
that?
I mean, I echo your comments, right? I mean, the transformation itself is the change that your organization is undergoing in order to keep up with where you want to be in the future based on the market, right? And I think it's a famous quote, like the only thing certain in life is that change will occur, right? And death and taxes. But so I think it's something that your organization needs to be good at because it's not going to stop, right? It's going to be a continuous momentum. And then the technology side is really just what's enabling that change. And, there's more and more innovation in the technology stack we're seeing every day, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a supply chain, whether you're on the supply chain side or you're on the enterprise procurement side, either way, the fact that you're tackling digital transformation or transformation as a whole, for me, obviously, even with just some of the recent highlights through COVID and things like that, it's become very, very apparent that supply chain and procurement organizations are competitive advantages in the marketplace if they're proactively managed, right?
Yep.
And that's what we're really talking about. And really, you're driving that through technological advancement for the most part, right? Whether that's actual systems that you're investing in or people or other things. So quick question for you, Katelyn. I know when you start to talk about digital transformation, at least in my mind, when I hear digital transformation, I immediately think about the system stack, the tech stack. What technology am I deploying? Am I going out to some type of a blockchain solution? All sorts of different technologies out there. I mean, it's exploding, right? But it's not all about technology, right? I mean, what about the people in the process side of this as well?
Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned, right? It's the business function that is driving the competitive advantage, right? At the end of the day. So that process is what is giving you value. But in order to enable that process, you need different components of technology to get you there. And then at the end of the day, you need people in order to enact those processes. And I mean, as we progress here, let's see how the role of people change, right? There's probably behavioral changes and roles responsibility changes, but at the end of the day, there are still people involved. So if you're not thinking about your process first, as well as your people impact, then your technology isn't going to be successful. You're not going to get that full return from that technology investment.
Yeah, I mean, I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later. We talked about running through and discussing a little bit of what's out there and trends associated with people and certainly the processes, right? Ashish, any thoughts for you on people and process as opposed to the technology side of it?
I think I'll give you a real example. I'm actually working with a client right now where we're actually embarking on a transformation journey. It's a 18-month-long journey where we are going to do a business transformation and enabled by the technology, which happens to be Ariba in this case. The important part is the client has acknowledged and recognized that change management is not an afterthought. It's not something that will come in 6 months in the project. We are scrambling for the right people even before the project starts. So we kind of know what kind of changes are we going to impact and what communication needs to happen. Because honestly, in procurement, like, we talked the other day, if you're talking transformation, you're going to change people's roles and responsibilities. You're going to take authorities away from people and give it to somebody else. Those are big changes. Personality changes, right? If you may, in terms of what I'll be signing a contract for X number of dollars today, tomorrow I can't. Those cannot be handled post-fact. They have to be addressed upfront. So the transition, and to Katelyn's point, the adoption of the change is smooth. That is where you need to make sure change and technology both need to be hand in hand with business right from the get-go.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm going to jump into the disconnect with IT, but before I do that, I know you led off with data. I think I'm just about ready to get data tattooed on my shoulder, right? Because of how important it is in life now, especially running a large community like I do. But there's a question associated with data that I'm going to bring it in right now. I don't usually start with questions this early on, so we're going to go off script really quickly. Powell, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Powell asks, how would you move from data to wisdom using technology to improve your sourcing results? It's a little high level. It's about 60,000 feet, but I love to kick us off there.
So how do you go from data to wisdom?
Using technology to improve your sourcing results. So how do you transform data into wisdom so that you can...
Yeah, Mike, I think this fits into the people, process, tech framework really well, right?
Yep.
Like you need the technology piece where you have data that is reliable and trustworthy, right?
Yep.
And is clean. You need the processes in place to understand what am I measuring and why. And then you need the people aspect of, hey, I need data scientists or statisticians, depending on whatever it is that you're measuring and the various tools that you have. But you need to have the right skills and knowledge in-house to interpret that data, right?
Yep.
You can build a lot of really great algorithms, but at the end of the day, I think it's the magic touch of a really, really good data scientist to say, this is what the statistics are telling me, right?
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Ashish, you first.
I was just going to add, again, a specific example in terms of data and how it leads to wisdom eventually, better insights. When I say wisdom, I think that's better. It's better insight so you can make better decisions, eventually better sourcing events and better rates. So the client has plethora of categories. They probably buy the same things or similar things on the different categories. So when they run the business analytics or the procurement analytics, they get information, but the information is honestly not usable because you don't have a good picture of what you're buying from where for how much. You do have for certain categories, but because you have a huge tail, for example, your categories also expand. So what happens is you might have a great tool to kind of process the information, but the result is still meaningless, right? Because the data that fed into the engine is wrong. So the first thing we do is really look at your data in terms of categories. Do you have the right categories that you're buying? Are you buying from the right places? And what is the industry standard for those kind of categories? Kind of have a playbook for each category because they are different. There are nuances to each category. Once the data is cleansed, you run it through the insights engine, whatever the tool could be, and that's where technology plays a big role. Now you get insightful information, which again, the way I'm interpreting the word wisdom, comes in play. It says, okay, now I have data which is cleansed, which is accurate, which is correct, and I've got insights. Now I can run better sourcing events. So instead of going to 50 suppliers or vendors for sourcing a certain category, now I'm going to only 3 or 4 because I know what the industry standards are and what my categories are and what my annual spend, for example, for that categories.
Yeah.
So you can get better negotiations, if you may.
Yeah. For me, it comes back to data. For me is an Excel sheet, right? And the fact that they've been able to take an Excel sheet and turn it into Power BI, now I can see an interactive dashboard. Now I've got information. Information is turning into knowledge for me. And that knowledge of seeing this and being able to click in to an interactive, whether it's a Tableau or a Power BI dashboard, and I can dive in and go, wait a minute, why am I spending so much money in HR and benefits right now? And then I look and I go, wow, I've got 7 different background check companies. Okay, I probably need to aggregate that, right?
Correct.
That becomes an actionable item for me. So it went from data to information to knowledge to actionable item for me, all in one fell swoop. And it really was difficult until some of these visualization tools became available, right?
Absolutely.
And absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, we're still grappling with good data, bad data into the visualization tools. But at least what we do have access to now, we can start to create actionable and long-term benefits for that strategic improvement, right?
And I think, Mike, one more thing I'll add, extend your thinking, right? Having great reports, accurate reports is probably just the beginning of the battle because now you got to think about, so what? Okay, I found these big things I can work on. That's where the real hard work starts. Now you got to figure out how to fix those. That's where nuggets of transformation start, piling up before it's okay. Now I'm going to do this transformation. So it helps me get the KPIs back to where you want them to be. Now that you have a better data set.
So I'm just watching the LinkedIn feed while you're talking. Peter Bowl from Canada used to work at Air Canada. I don't know if Peter's retired from Air Canada or not. Says one of the most valuable people we had was a champion of data on our knowledge management team. The guy was amazing. The things he could do, I could only dream of. So you're absolutely right, Peter. I totally understand that. I want to come back on. We're jumping a little bit, and but I love it. I love the fact that we're. Thank you to the audience for jumping in and starting. We're banging all around. I appreciate it. I want to come back to the disconnect with IT because that's really what the topic was for today, right? Why? And here's my question, and I like to ask difficult questions. Why is IT still important in digital transformation of supply chain and procurement initiatives? Because a lot of what we're buying from a technology perspective is either SaaS-based or remote-based or a service or things like that. Why is IT still important to us?
So I think, again, let's think about it. When we say IT important, it's still driven by transformation, right? As we talk about the role of IT, I don't want us to think that leading with business transformation is still the most important thing. We just need to make sure IT is right there with them to enable the processes. Now, there are a couple of reasons I've seen technology to be part of business as you go through this thinking process of conceptualizing what your transformation needs to look like. Is one, IT does have a tab on the emerging technologies out there. And I'm not broad brushing it, but usually when you're running your business, keeping the lights on, your mind is heads down, kind of making sure you get the work done as a business owner, right? You do have links to different conferences, probably read some articles, but it's still theoretical. I believe IT normally is more in touch with the technology, emergence in terms of what's really happening. Like a few years back, IoT, 10 years back, IoT used to be the buzzword. Hey, IoT, IoT. Now you can buy IoT devices on Amazon. It's not even a word to be used because it's all over us. You might not know it, but it's all around us.
Yep.
Now, if you think about technologies like machine learning, AI, again, they are still kind of buzzwords, but they become very real. And how you leverage them in business, I think primarily comes through how the algorithms have emerged or matured over time. And typically that's a very technology mindset that you bring to the table. Hey, you can run a RPA bot for AP processing, right? Or you could run some kind of machine learning algorithm for demand planning that drives some procurement requirements. So it's a no-touch PO where you really trust the information. It's rule-based. That insight really comes from technology because they know what's happening from a technical perspective outside the world, and together the business owner's vision of where they want to lead procurement organization and technology saying how you can enable that. The sooner you're shaking hands, the more successful the journey is, versus you go down a path and you realize there are two other options for you which could have been better, faster, easier, that you missed out on. So that's the whole intent. And again, the idea is to help each other, not to be kind of a hindrance to each other's progress as you enable the transformation.
I got to be honest with you. When we first started talking about this about, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was a little bit shocked at what you were telling me was the disconnect between procurement and strategic sourcing as well as supply chain and IT. I think the reason why is because I've got 10, 15 years as an IT category manager in a high-tech company. And for me, it seems like a bit of a broken two-way door, right? Like procurement, and I don't know if it's just the people I hang around with, we complain all the time that IT calls us after they've already made a decision. They've told the vendor what the budget is. They've pretty much negotiated all the terms and conditions. And they bring us and go, hey, can you kind of bang these guys around like a cat with a ball for a little while and try and get a little bit extra? And we complain that we don't get brought to the table very often. But then hearing it from you that there's a lot of supply chain and procurement organizations that aren't necessarily involving IT in some of their decision-making process, it's kind of like, we're not eating our own dog food here a little bit, right? I mean, is that resonating with you, Katelyn? Is that what you're seeing when you're out engaging with clients?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very common behavior to have a disconnect between the business and IT. And I think, with any relationship, making sure that you're understanding the objectives of the other party, right? You have some level of respect or awareness of the work that each other does, right? So I think there's complete value in going together as business and IT in both those examples, both yours and Ashish's. And it's a matter of, just the discipline of making sure it happens, right?
Yeah.
And going through your relationship hygiene to make sure you're getting that done, right? Because the value is there.
All right. So thanks. I appreciate you two diving in with me from a definition perspective to try and just kind of set the stage on this thing, talk a little bit about what digital innovation is and what types of projects there are. I want to jump down and start to talk about what you're seeing from a trending perspective. So I guess what is in scope for digital transformation initiatives that are out there right now? I mean, Ashish, you talked about it a little bit. There's some folks that are simply trying to deploy RPA bots into their accounts payable department. That to them could be a digital transformation, right? I mean, a good RPA bot could cut thousands and thousands of man hours out of processes. I know RPA bots are getting deployed a lot in mailrooms right now for digitalization and routing of inbound mail and things like that. Couple that up with a good ERP system or an inbound purchasing system, and now you're really cooking with gas, right? And then there's some other people that are doing full-blown people process technology, forklift upgrades. That's right, I'm going back to my old waterfront days. I'm going to say forklift upgrade. They're doing full-blown forklift upgrades. How do you determine what's a good fit? How do we determine what's a good fit for us and based on your experience?
So I think the starting point has to be acknowledging and understanding where you're what's your starting point? Where are you in the maturity curve, right? And it's not even funny how many times we go and talk to our clients, and we talk to different clients within the same company and how different their perspective or perception of their maturity is, right?
Yeah.
Some people, if you think about a novice to a best in class, let's say it's a scale of 5, a lot of people think they're 3, 4, in that range. And when you talk to them and you give them a definition of what a maturity means, they're like jaw dropping, like, oh, really? We have so much more to go. This is where we are missing the opportunity.
Yeah.
Honestly. So you have to first level set what's your starting point, right? If you're going to be a 3 or a 4, argument's sake, in a scale of 5, then you probably have some really cutting edge stuff that you're working on. You kind of managed your process pretty well. But if you're 1 or 2, you got ways to go before you really get into the cutting edge stuff. You still have to figure out your processes and your data, for example, right? So the first thing we do is really try to understand what's your starting point, and then let's say there are 5 or 6 levels. How do you manage your contracts? How do you do your sourcing? How do you manage your data, the master data, whether it's direct or indirect, because different challenges, right? Then we say, what's your big ticket item? What is it that you really want to see yourself beating the competition? You can't be doing all 15 things. You have to choose the 5 things that you want to be in the 4-5 range, and the remaining you could be in the 3-4 range, and that's good enough for now, right? We have those conversations. Once we agree on the construct and the framework of where they want to go, for each it's different. Some people want to be really, more advanced in sourcing because they do so many sourcing events. Some people have long-term contracts and they have direct materials that they really want to focus on operational procurement, right? I want to go to a no-touch process, a fewer approvals, like depend on my planning results versus going and figuring out the quantities on a daily basis. So it depends on where you are in the spectrum of maturity. You can choose which levers you want to really get yourself mature in, and then use digital enablement to get transformation done.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And based on that, I know I'm going to fall on my sword here a little bit. I know I wanted to put a poll up and ask people where they are from a maturity perspective. I'm new to polling inside of Zoom, so I apologize to everybody in advance. I've only done 1 so far. Here's what I want to do. I want everybody on LinkedIn and everybody inside of this Zoom room on a scale of 1 to 5, so I can see in the feeds on both the chat and in the Zoom room, in LinkedIn. On a scale of 1 to 5, where do you think your maturity is associated with transformation right now? And I want you to think about it from people, process, and technology perspective. Here's my definition. Number 1, you barely know how to spell the word transformation. You're basically working with an abacus and some chisels, right? And number 5, you're fully loaded into the matrix and you know exactly where everything is at all times. So somewhere between 1 and 5, where are you? And just start to put those up. Let me see where you think you all are in the process. I really appreciate it. And I'll come back to that in a minute, but I wanted to just kind of get some information because I want to jump back in and see where we all are if we get some numbers out there. So thank you for giving me a minute on that. So let me ask you this, based on what you said around where people are and what they're trying to deploy, is there a playbook here? Is there a trend here? Are there certain size companies that should be looking at certain types of innovations? Are there certain segments of organizations? Like, for example, is there more innovation in supply chain taking place in small to mid, light industrial manufacturing versus intellectual property shops like advertising? Katelyn, I think you said you're focused on media organizations. God forbid we get into the MarTech Lumascape, right? Where is there a playbook here? Are you seeing, what certain people should be doing, or is it really all the way down to the individual company?
Ashish, I'll let you speak to
Yeah.
the specific industry.
That's okay. I can take it. So I think, is there a playbook? There is a playbook that takes you almost there. It's not a one size fit all, to be honest with you, Mike, right? I mean, yes, when you look at a media company, you look at certain categories which are specific to the media company. For example, advertising, marketing, they have certain print information that they need to worry about, right? And when I go to a manufacturing company, most of those things don't even matter to them. They want to get their materials in time. They want to make sure they have the best rates. They have, visibility and transparency with their suppliers in terms of on-time deliveries, right? So the priority could change by each industry, if you may, or by the kind of work you're doing within the industry. But once you are in that industry, for example, let's go back to media. If print and marketing is your two big categories, yes, there are industry standards that you can follow. That's where the category playbook comes into place. For this type of category in this industry, this is how you typically, these are the big vendors, these are the networks that you connect with. And sometimes, as an example, I'll give you freight, for example. What's happening in the freight industry is because it's so kind of fragmented and there is so much fluctuation, you can now be in a situation where you could be buying freight or buying transportation, and while buying you could actually see what's happening for that particular lane for your competition, whether it's the same industry or a different industry. The point being, while you're in the industry, there is definitely some guardrails that you work with, some best in class, but at the same time you should still have to be a little flexible and independent in terms of what do I adopt in because this is my priority, right? Mm-hmm. Like freight, you would typically think is a big thing in supply chain, like material supply chain, product supply chain. Mm-hmm. But I've seen that being a big thing even in media, right? Honestly, I've seen them use so many suppliers for freight, and I'm kind of initially wondering, why would you have so much? But then there are business reasons for that, right? So even though it's a different industry, there is commonality in terms of how you can use the categories and kind of harmonize them to have the best structures working with the suppliers.
Yeah, I mean, and listen, coming out of Publicis Group, right? I mean, I'm ex-Publicis Group of a couple of decades, and I know you wouldn't think that freight is a really big thing in the advertising and marketing space. But between getting print to OOH to billboards around the country and experiential marketing and advertising now, I mean, I don't even know what the freight bill is for setting up the X Games, which is basically a just gigantic Red Bull ad. But that freight bill is absolutely enormous, right?
Yeah.
And you'd think, okay, there's freight, there's warehousing, there's logistics, right? There's break fix, everything that goes into that, just like light industrial manufacturing. And so I hear what you're saying, which is it really kind of relies on the side, on the company and what the company's specific needs are. Are there any hacks to get you going? Are you finding places out there from a trending perspective where, listen, you can't boil the ocean on this thing, right? You're going to start small and you're going to try and make some wins. And then as you get those wins, chief procurement officers, chief supply chain officers, they show a couple of victories, and then they go out and they get more and more budget for more and more transformation, whether that's systems or people or process improvement. So are there some hack areas where you think there's real easy, like emerging easy wins, like, for example, maybe the RPA arena or things like that?
Yeah, I think there are definitely areas or silos within the business process that you can, like you mentioned, accounts payable, RPA is a common thing these days. You do a lot of automation in that area. But I think if anytime I have to go and talk to a client about where do you really want to fix the foundation, it starts with data. Okay. Honestly, you can put a technology on a broken process and it will work, but you will have a broken process, right? So data is where I've typically seen the clients have the most success. And you could actually run a separate engagement just to transform the data to be consistent, harmonized. And when I say data, it's a broad term, but it could be categories, vendors, materials. It could be any of those things. And they in itself are monsters to handle, to be honest with you, right? Especially if you've been running on a certain construct for the last 20 years and you're thinking about transformation. So I would say start there, but break fix arrangements, I agree with you. There are, like, for example, the e-procurement tools now, like Ariba and Coupa, they have some nice ways of interacting with the system. So you tend to stay within the guardrails of what you're trying to buy versus just, remember like 15 years back, this way, hey, am I ordering BROOM broom or BROM broom, right? And it could be two different things and going to two different vendors for purchases. All those things are history now. They don't happen unless you're like really in a rudimentary technology. But those things have been addressed. Now we are thinking, what next? So you could fix pockets of the process, but you still have to fix the foundation, which is data, to really be transformative.
Which, Ashish, just to jump in there, I think you're bringing up a good point in that I think the mindset when you're going into something like this is look at the big picture, right? Like, where do you want to be? Have an understanding of where you are, and then break it up into pieces, right? So that you are fixing the foundation first, which is a really great place to bring in IT, right? To make sure that you're setting up the foundation, that everybody's on board, you have everything you need in order to get to that end vision, right? You can't just jump in and do everything all at once. And you probably shouldn't just jump in and do the low hanging fruit, right? Because that might not be aligned with whatever that future vision is. So just 2 cents there.
What are you seeing for trends? And that's great. Thank you for bringing me back on point, which is what you're leaving on the table by not getting IT engaged, right? So I would be amiss if I didn't ask the question of, from a trending perspective, how are you seeing the good operations engage with IT? What's the trend there? In my mind, I've got a couple different ways of engaging with IT. Either I got to go down the hall and beg for somebody to show up, or I start to create these types of cohabitation panels, or I blur the lines completely and I have technologists sitting with procurement people and procurement people and supply chain people sitting with technologists, and we're sharing headcount on a regular basis. What's the trend in your opinion? Where is that all going? How do we not leave something off the table by not engaging IT?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a trend per se, right? I would say that it's probably unique at every single organization. My personal opinion is you should be sitting down together and talking about your objectives, right? There should be some sort of planning event on some sort of cadence, whether that's like biannually or even annually, where you're connecting and you're agreeing on how do we stay connected and how do we communicate status, right, of where we need XYZ. And then it just comes down to like old-fashioned relationships, right? Like I guarantee you have somebody down the hall, right, or you used to, I should say, now on chat, that you can, work with and rely on because you have a relationship. So I think it is very smart to continue to develop those relationships informally, but also have that formal cadence of where you're holding each other accountable, right, with some sort of framework. But Ashish would love your,
No, I think, and just one thing, Mike, that I've seen, I don't know if it's a trend or if it's just more people are kind of thinking about it. It's like building I call it a conduit between IT and business, and in this case being procurement. So that conduit could be an individual that's managing IT from a multiple business perspective, depending on the size of the operations you're talking about, or it could be one-to-one. But that conduit is an independent body that's responsible to ensure that the business interests are accounted for and the technology and IT interests are also considered as a part of those conversations. Now, you might not be able to meet every week as departments, but this conduit is the facilitator of that, being always on the same page and ensuring that as an organization, you're being successful, not as a department. I've seen that, again, more and more often in some of the larger organizations.
I've seen that as well. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So I'm looking at the LinkedIn stream, and there's a really interesting comment there from Pierre. He says, "What are you leaving on the table?" ? headaches and mile-long IT security questionnaires to vet a vendor, right? And I completely understand where Pierre's coming from. There's a lot of frustration associated with IT security audits when you're trying to pump out good sourcing and procurement, right? And that relationship is at times very conflicting against time schedules, right? However, that's almost on, okay, I need IT to do a security audit associated with a product or a product that I'm buying for IT or for some other stakeholder. What I'm really trying to get at is, okay, I understand that, but what about the relationship when I want to transform my supply chain or procurement organization and I need to bring in a consultancy and I expect somebody to have some, like, I as a procurement or supply chain person don't necessarily understand, GDPR or data, risk management and things like that. I need somebody from my organization to come in. And that's what you're talking about, is creating this continuous mesh relationship between IT and sourcing, right?
Yep. And sooner the better. A concept is being formed, inception of an idea or a thought. And I've seen that in successful companies where IT and business, and not just procurement, honestly, this is across the board, even finance, broader supply chain, they work together to put together a business case for why this is important for the business and how technology will enable it. Obviously, the GDPR is so important these days, but as you're evaluating the software, for example, or the technology, you're not going to give surprise to anybody because you're working on this together. That's the mindset change that will not leave anything on the table, or exactly what I think our friend over there said, headaches on the table. That happens because if you involve them too late and too few times.
Do you see a future where technologists are naturally embedded? I know we talked about data scientists, but systems architects, no code experts, do you see a place where they're going to be embedded inside of supply chain and procurement organizations in the future? Are you starting to see that trend now?
I have not. I know what you're trying to get to in terms of having technologists as a part of the business organization. I think it's a double-edged sword, to be honest with you. One, how deep do you want the technologists to be? Do you want them to be just kind of ensuring the plug and play things work? So let's say an API, so you have a new software that you're working with and that technologists kind of make sure it works for you. But then what happens beyond that from a maintenance standpoint, right? I think whenever we are doing something from an interface or something that we're customizing for a certain organization, there is always more cost to maintain it as you go through different levels of maturity from a software perspective, business process perspective. Who manages that, right? Those things will drive how deep the technology resource or person needs to be sitting in the business organization. Alternatively, like we discussed, instead of having somebody sitting there, can we have better connections? Like, you said there is a mesh between technology and business. If that we can make it work, I don't think you need to kind of digress your mind from running the business to ensuring that technology is also working in your business organization. That's how I would look at it.
So I did want to get to, I got a couple of questions. I want to get to those. The next part of this conversation I wanted to have was about how to fix the problem. But I think we're already there, right? We're talking about building this new symbiotic relationship where the lines of supply chain and enterprise procurement are kind of blurred a little bit. Mm-hmm. And there's a constant discussion. It's almost like, and I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole and have open seating plans with procurement and IT people all sitting together, because that would probably tend to be a really crazy Thursday night drinking party, I think. But yeah. But I see that as really one of the big fixes here. I want to ask one quick question from Kishore on inside of our Zoom room. Thank you, Kishore, for using the Q&A. How do you strike the right balance between having enough knowledge of IT to be credible with them without getting so deep that you lose sight of the strategic commercial opportunities that you're responsible for?
So it's, and I'm sure, Katelyn, you probably have a perspective. I think it's an art. It's not a science. You need to know your customer. You need to know, if I'm an IT guy who is talking to like a chief procurement officer or even somebody, in a senior director level of the procurement organization, I need to know at what level can I connect with them and get to them. So I understand, because ultimately, again, I'm a firm proponent of IT is an enabler of a business process. We don't drive, we follow. You tell us where you want to go, we will help you get there better, faster, sooner, more cost effective, right? As technology. So if I'm talking to a business counterpart, I need to be very, very careful knowing where, what do they get and what is too much for them, right? And that's an art, unfortunately. There is no science behind it. Some people tend to go more technical because they know so much stuff. You got to have a way to kind of bring them back up and have a conversation where it doesn't get lost in translation, if you may.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, Ashish. I do think it's an art, and I would say it's important to remember like what your objective is and making sure that your objective is met, right? So if you need to meet that person, to use your language, Ashish, at their level with their language using, the technology vernacular, then do so, but make sure you bring it back and tie it back to the business objective that you're driving.
Yep.
And I would argue that you're actually going to be in a better position being able to speak the IT language to connect with that person in order to get what you need. So I actually think it's an opportunity and not really a challenge.
Yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity for cross education, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think and there was a point in time back in about 20 years ago where we were taking IT organizations, and I was part of one, where we were taking all the technologists and letting all the technologists be technologists, heavy hardcore technology, and we were separating out some of the business function associated with IT organizations and saying, okay, these are going to be the asset management people, these are going to be the project management people, these are going to be the budgeting and forecasting people and the sourcing people in IT. But I think that those days now, I think we get too far down that rabbit hole. I think we need to come back together. And I think that, I need procurement and supply chain people who speak geek, and I need geeks who speak procurement and supply chain automation, because there's no way possible right now with the amount of technology and the number of companies coming into the marketplace right now from a technology perspective. I mean, if you think there's a lot of buy tech companies in the market right now, just wait a year. There's going to be triple that, right?
Yeah. And
we're going to need real technologists to help us evaluate, the back end architectures. How much of this can be some of these spend analytics companies that I'm seeing, I could recreate in a weekend with Tableau and a decent SQL server, right?
Yeah.
If I had the feeds. So I really need somebody who can get underneath the covers and then tell me also, like, what's the risk? How much of this is being housed on a virtual server at AWS? And what happens if this company doesn't stay viable because they're in Series A funding right now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so I see that as I continue to harp on it, but I see that more as this fabric that needs to be created between the two organizations.
Yeah, but I think, Mike, let me add one more example here of a client that I've worked with. So the supply chain business owner had a business warehouse group, like a BW group, that was running reporting in terms of make sure that OTIFs are there. Are we leaving anything on the table from a customer centric perspective, right? So very, very right place to be in terms of knowing what they're doing with BW. But as technology matured, they started getting into machine learning. They started getting into AI. Those are not just standard skills, right? Those are technical skills. Now you start hiring those people. To your earlier question, now you start building this mini IT organization within your business function. And guess what? The IT group felt that there is a shadow IT now running in parallel, and there are conflicting priorities, conflicting skills, and you're not able to get the synergy. So to my earlier point, while this is important to mesh, you got to be very careful how deep you want to go into your area, because we know shadow procurement, right? Similarly, shadow IT, you want to avoid that position, because that's where, again, the conflicts start becoming more and more obvious.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I just want a good comment that just came up in the chat. It's not a question, but it's a fantastic comment. Ensuring that IT has enough time to do their security check and due diligence, I'm assuming, is just as important as giving legal time to review the contracts. Both should be part of the contracting process. I completely agree with you. And I think that at least from major transformational events that you're attempting to do, it's almost as important, in my opinion, or probably right on the same level, to engage HR in the hiring process, because you're starting to transform your teams, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about this a little bit last week. As important as it is for IT and to keep IT on the table because you're losing something when you don't bring them in early, it's just as important because they're gonna handle it from an IT and from a systems integration perspective and from a knowledge base perspective. But HR, and I know we haven't spent a lot of time on it, you could say exactly the same thing for HR, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
you really need a subject matter expert in HR right now who understands data process, who understands, no code and where that's all going, understands where strategic sourcing is going, across all the different areas and the emerging technologies in that space. And I mean, and we haven't even talked about the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is blockchain, smart contract, right? I mean,
absolutely.
I mean, that is, I don't want to go completely pie in the sky here, but if we're talking about the fact that we are leaving something on the table by not having IT involved, I think that's probably one of the biggest concerns I have right now about not having IT involved in my planning process from a CPO perspective is I don't have that vision 3 to 5 years out.
Correct.
I don't know that there's a lot of CPOs or a lot of heads of supply chain management out there right now who really have any clue what public, private, crypto, Bitcoin, smart contract, Ether versus Ethereum, what any of these things mean. Never mind the explosion of NFTs. What does that mean, right? So for me, I see it as, and correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, is that where we all have to go, Ashish?
Yes, absolutely. That's inevitable. I don't think that's a question. That's like when and how.
No.
Yeah, so that's happening, and obviously some of the pioneering, some of the more risk-taking companies who have dabbled with technology before are more on the cusp of it versus some others who would like to be the followers and not necessarily learn in the process. So it's happening.
Yeah,
it's happening.
Somebody just said the HR point that you just made needs to be a whole nother hour-long discussion, which I completely agree with. Maybe we'll take that into Clubhouse and have a conversation around that and what you are seeing at PwC associated with large-scale tech transformation projects and engaging HR to get the right mix of people. That would be a fantastic conversation, I think, to have on Clubhouse because we've got a bunch of HR people on Clubhouse as well. So,
yeah.
So that's
again something that I'm actually working on right now with one of the CPOs is exactly that. But HR is not involved, but it is all about HR though.
Yeah, you got to get them in the room, man. You got to.
Yes.
It's like because you know what's going to happen if you don't get them in the room. The HR person is going to come down the hall and go,
Yeah.
"Wait a minute, you've been talking about me for the last 3 months, and I'm not in the room.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to slow this whole thing down. We're going to tap the brakes.
Yeah.
I want to know what you're talking about, right? So you don't want to do that. We got about 7 minutes left. If you have a couple of questions, please put them in the Q&A. I love this conversation. I love nerding out around IT and procurement just because I came out of it, like I said earlier. Quick question for you. I want to, from an innovation perspective, you're on a lot of engagements, some large, some small, some forklifts, some small spot stuff. Can you give me an example of where you've seen either a supply chain or an enterprise innovation through digitalization or automation, something along that line, that has, and I'm going to use it, I'm going to say it, melted your face off? I want something that's left you absolutely speechless, like, oh my God, I didn't even think of that. Holy cow, look at what these people have done. They're way out ahead of everybody else. Anything that you've seen?
So I think in pockets, right, Mike, it's not, I would say my biggest aha moment actually happened a few years back. It's not as recent as, maybe using blockchain, for example, because blockchain is still kind of emerging. It was when we had done a transformation using technology as an enabler, where we went from a very mundane, rudimentary, direct procurement process where the requisitions were created, they were consolidated into purchase orders, they went through multiple levels of approvals depending on who's approving them. It would take time. It was like not just a long process, it was a very convoluted process, right? With multiple touch points, human touches, PR was touched, PO was touched, acknowledgement from the vendor was touched, everything was being touched, and it took like, for the CPO at that point he was just like, how do I make it shorter so I can actually not stock so much, right? Because it's all connected. So we embarked on this transformation journey with a goal, with a vision of having no touch POs. we won't touch the POs. We will trust the information, as I said, the data that comes from our planning engine. We will build rules in the system to ensure the human intelligence is repetitive, right? It's not like you're making a new decision every day. You're making decisions based on some data sets that are repetitive. There might be 15, 20 permutations you're using. We put them in the rule engine and we let the process flow. We started with a pilot and we expanded it. But trust me, it took some learning, but the end result was absolutely 30 to 40% of the POs by the time, when we moved out, because they took over the process, was no touch. That was huge. That was a huge, and I know this is something anybody can do right now. If you have a decent ERP in your backend and a decent planning system that you can feed the right data to get the right outputs, trust me, you can do it. At that time, it was like, oh, wow. Now the things have moved, right? I think we briefly talked about it. It's not about just no touch. It's about, can I take human intelligence out of the system? Let the system do all the thinking, whether it's direct, indirect sourcing. I mean, can we get to that? People are thinking. They're dabbling with the ideas. Right now, it's in the proof of concept, pilot kind of concept, but that's where we are heading to. So how much intelligence, how much uncertainty because of a human touch can I take out of the system? And let the machine drive some of that thinking, right? It's kind of scary to think about it. Like we said, have you imagined a world where you will never submit an invoice because
I was just going to go there. I was like, okay, if we go from no touch PO, the mind melt moment for me, the face melt off moment for me was, and I was in a clubhouse room the other day, and somebody said, when are we going to get to a place where we don't have invoices?
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, I'm going to have to noodle on that a little bit. I mean, that's such a forward-thinking question that it just scares the heck out of most procurement and supply chain people, right? But we're probably not that far off based on some of the technology. I'm going to put a pin in that because we're going to come back. I want to do this again with you. I want to talk about what is 3 to 5 years out. Katelyn, really quickly, because we only have a couple minutes left. Have you seen an aha moment? Have you seen something that's, wow, this is really innovative and smart and can be replicated?
I mean, I'm kind of with Ashish on this one, where I don't really have anything that's like mind blowing, right, or melt your face off. But I think some of the progression that we've made in like analytics to enable better decision making is really transformational. Yeah. So it's not necessarily anything super sexy, right? But it's really, really effective and valuable. So I guess that's my aha moment. And I would say, Mike, to your question of, when are we going to get to the no invoicing, right? It's like now everybody needs to be thinking about, okay, what are those foundational steps that have to happen based on where I am in my maturity curve to get there? So.
I got 2 minutes left and I got to wrap up. Powell, Sarah, Beth, I see your questions. I'm not going to be able to fit them in before we end. So if you can take those questions and go to LinkedIn on the feed here, if you can ask those questions on the LinkedIn feed, I'm sure somebody from Ashish or Katelyn's team would be more than happy to answer those questions for you. We'll continue to feed because we're live broadcasting out on the LinkedIn right now. So I apologize that I'm not going to be able to get to all of those because we're just out of time. My time management is the best that I can. I apologize. But thank you very much for the interaction today. One last thing. So Katelyn, ladies first. If there's one thing that the viewers need to take away today, what is the one nugget that you can drop for them associated with making sure that you don't leave something on the table in your digital transformation by not including IT? What's the one thing?
So I'm always going to come at this from a people perspective. So I would say making sure you have that leadership vision and the journey by which to get there, and making sure that you are putting your relationships first. Your basic human behavior, don't forget it. It's super, super important. Great.
Thank you so much. What about you, Ashish? What's your one takeaway? What's your one takeaway nugget?
So in PwC, and I'll throw that here as well. So in PwC, we believe in this concept of don't go it alone, right? Don't think you are in this by yourself, whether it's a business function or an IT function. You work better together. 2 and 2 is 22, not 4. Think with that mindset. I'm almost guaranteeing you every project you undertake will be a successful one. And it's not just IT and business, it's business connected with the other businesses that you're impacting and the technology aspects. Go together, you will get more out of it.
I love that. I think that's a great place to end. I love the fact that 2 and 2 equals 22. Don't go it alone should be the tattoo right underneath. It should say data. Don't do it alone. Right on the tattoo. So listen, thank you very much to PwC for today. I love the fact that this didn't get into a sell fest. Thank you so much for that. Lots and lots of nuggets dropped. I'm going to go back and listen to this again. I think we could do a whole other thing on Clubhouse. I'd love to invite you to my Clubhouse platform so that we can talk more about that. Just a quick highlight and note for all of you that are in the room and on LinkedIn right now. The PwC folks are sponsoring our June 3rd conference on digital futures, the digitalization of supply chain and procurement. We thank you so much for the sponsorship for that, by the way. They will be exhibiting at a booth. I might even convince them to actually potentially get into some gamification and give something away at their booth. Wink, wink, nod, nod. Maybe I can get them to throw something in there. And we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much, Katelyn and Ashish. Really appreciate it today. And wow, really amazing discussion. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for giving us your 1 hour, guys, today. Thank you.
Absolutely. Everybody that didn't get their questions answered, please throw them up on LinkedIn so that we can continue the conversation there, and keep an eye out for a Clubhouse event. All right. All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye,
Take care.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.